the Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the sixth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 23rd of Nisan, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Friday, April 10th, 2026. We will read Parashat Shemini this coming Shabbat, and it is the 8th day of the Omer. Let's begin. Let's now turn to Me'am Loez. We will continue learning the Parsha of Parashat Shemini in preparation for Shabbat that is coming up. We're on the 23rd verse and we're going to look at the 23rd and 24th verses of the 9th chapter of the book of Leviticus. It's in Parashat Shemini, and we've now seen Aaron offer all these sacrifices and do the things to get the ark ready. And it was interesting because what we hear according to the Midrash is during this previous time when Aaron was doing the work and Moses was doing the work inside the tabernacle, from the external perspective, it looked like to the community that, well, the sacrifices were being offered, the tabernacle is being used. Why isn't God's presence dwelling? The people noticed that God's presence wasn't there. And I just think it's important to pause there. What's assumed here, which is really interesting, is that everybody sort of knew, even if they were not inside the tabernacle, even though they were outside the tabernacle, not even inside the grounds, that God dwelled in that place or didn't, right? That was a palpable presence felt by the entire community. It's something that I look back on often, and when we realize we don't have the temple or we don't have the Mishkan anymore, it's something that I look back on with great yearning. Like, what would it really feel like to, as a whole entire community, feel the presence of God in a real way? It's one of the things I tap into when I think about remembering the Beit HaMikdash and remembering the destruction of Jerusalem, especially once it gets to the 3 weeks. This is an important way to tap into the spirituality of mourning the destruction of the temple. But all the people were seeing these sacrifices happen and this training happened, and they were starting to get upset because they said, well, we built this whole entire tabernacle with the idea that God's presence would dwell here, and we don't see anything happening. And it actually even got to Aaron, who is offering sacrifice to us, is why isn't God's presence dwelling? Why isn't God's presence dwelling? And I'm doing all the right things. I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to be doing. And why isn't God dwelling in this place? Why don't we feel God's presence? And even Aaron began to think, maybe God still hasn't forgiven me about the golden calf yet, what I've done previously. And maybe I'm just not good enough for this. And it's at that point that Moshe steps in, according to the Midrash, and prays for Aaron, that Aaron prays for himself, and Moses prays for Aaron as well, believing that, yes, he is the person to do it. He is the one who asks of God's command. And it's at that point that we see, according to the Torah, the 24th verse, where it says, V'teitza eish milifnei Hashem, v'tochal al hamizbeach et olav et al chalavim, vayar kol am vayaronu, vayiplu al pneihem. Fire came forth before God and consumed the burnt offering and the choice parts on the altar. When the people saw this, they raised their voice in praise and threw themselves on their face. This line is very interesting, and it's one of the most beautiful lines, I think, in the Chumash and the 5 books of the Torah, that says this is the moment when God really came to dwell. And supposedly it was like a roaring lion. This fire came down from above to burn the first sacrifice in the altar and begin the Ner Tamid as well, the eternal light that would constantly lighting inside the tabernacle. And this is one of the most joyous parts, because the Jewish people are finally able to see the fruits of their labor, that they've done all this work, they've built the tabernacle, they've actually now offered the sacrifice, they have a high priest and everything like this, and they can finally see that God's dwelling in this place. And it's very interesting that this occurs, according to the Midrash, after Moses kind of combines with Aaron and prays for him, and that they pray together. And this sincere moment of brokenness from Aaron, that maybe I'm not good enough, and Moses coming with him saying, no, you are good enough, and I believe in you, and we're going to pray together, and it's going to take both of us. Because that is the moment when God's presence dwells. I think what it's trying to show us in a very beautiful way is when we stand up for each other, especially when we see someone else who's broken, and try to help them and be there for them, especially someone who's broken who needs to do a real responsibility in the world. And we believe in them and have faith in them and work together and pray for them. Not pray that we wish we could be the leader and they're not good enough, but pray that they're the right person and that God should be with them at this moment. That's when God's presence dwells. If we can do that, then God's presence dwells in this world. And I think that's a really good way to think about, like, how did the tabernacle actually begin? How did the sacrifices actually begin on the 8th day? It's when a brother chose to pray for his brother, right? And believe in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And I think if we could do that as a Jewish people together, pray for each other and hope in each other and believe in each other without trying to steal each other's role or step on each other's feet per se, I really do think God's presence will come down and dwell once again. We're going to now start some new learning in the Mishnah Torah, our halacha section of the Daily Derech. And obviously we've now passed Pesach, but we have this new mitzvah ongoing that we kind of have been left with since Passover, which is the counting of the Omers, or mitzvah tzvirat Omer, right? The mitzvah of counting the Omer. And so I really want to go through this halacha. Obviously, I'm a little late to the punch here. I want to get through Pesach. But I think it's important for us to review and to learn what this mitzvah is all about. It's one of these mitzvot where I think there are some who do it, and the idea of counting is something that some people know, and we announced it at Minyan and everything. But I think very few people actually understand what this mitzvah is truly about, at least in its original sense here. And so we'll spend today talking about where this mitzvah came from and going through some of Rambam's laws on this particular mitzvah, of sort of originally how it was observed and what is the cause of it. And then in our next session, our next episode that we'll have after Shabbat, we'll take yet one more session to actually just go through the practical halachas that you need to know in order to do this mitzvah today, which looks remarkably different than it used to be. So very, very important. So let's start with the history here. So we actually are given a specific mitzvah in the Torah to do something a little bit different. In the 23rd chapter of Leviticus, on the 10th verse, it says, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you are come to the land which I give to you and shall reap its harvest, then shall you bring an omer of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest." Now, and what is an omer? An omer is actually is a bundle. It's a measurement of grain, of a grain product of some sort. So it's saying you should bring this grain product of some sort as a first fruit, Reshit Kitzirchem, which means the beginning of your harvest or the first thing of your harvest, to the Kohen, right, to the temple. So it sounds very similar to Bikurim in some ways, first fruits, but here it's specifically, we can tell by this language of Omer that it's not fruits for that say, but it's actually an earlier harvest, which is some sort of grain harvest of some sort, at least from what we know right now. Then we're told in verse 11, "And he shall wave the Omer before the Lord to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it." So we learn really two pieces of information from the 11th verse. Number one, it's going to be waved, right? There's like a waving of the Omer around, the Shiva around, which is really interesting. Of that must have been an interesting sight to see that happen. And it's supposed to, on the morrow after the Sabbath, we're told when this happens. Now, according to halacha, what this means is after the first day of Pesach, right? This is when you start to do it. And that's why we start on the second day of Pesach, we start counting the Omer, because of this verse right here. Now, it then says, and that's what we basically get from the Torah itself. We get actually, that's not true. We really get a little bit more. It says, and you, in the 14th verse, "And you shall eat neither bread nor parched corn nor green ears until that very day, until you have brought an offering to your God." Right? And you should, so what do we get from verse 14 here is that actually we can't eat grain. We can't eat the products of the field until we bring this first of the harvest. So this is going to be very important. This is where the actual laws that many people don't know about and aren't fully, I think, observed today. There's a little bit of a controversy about it, but this is the idea of Yeshan and Chadash, old and new, and specifically grain. The idea is that before we begin counting the Omer, you actually can't eat the new grain of the season. You can only eat the grain that's been harvested from the previous year, and that's the meaning of Yeshan, or old. Once you count Sfirat Omer, then you could start eating Chadash. Then you could start eating new grain. And the reason is because now that first grain offering, or what we actually see according to the Rambam and according to the Gemara, is going to be a barley harvest. That first sheaf of barley has been offered to Hashem, and now you have permission to eat of the earth. You have permission to eat of that grain here. So really, really important. And the Rambam in his halachas, this is actually in the 7th chapter of daily offerings and additional offerings, Tamidin umusafin, that he explains, the Rambam sort of explains that according to the Gemara, how this actually went about. There's this whole entire idea of people bringing 3 seah of barley and 3 baskets with 3 sickles, and it would become dark, and they would do it at night, and it was this whole scene, and people would come out, and they said, there's this whole dialogue that happened. You could check the actual halacha for it, but it was this really whole, big ritual that the whole community would be involved in, the offering the first barley harvest of the land of Israel. And so it was really this big celebration moment of like, before we can actually take part in the gifts that God gives us, specifically of this like most important food, barley, right? And grain in general, and bread products and everything like that, we first have to thank God, and we have to bring this back to God at this point. So, I think today, obviously, we don't bring grain sheaves. We don't, at least those of us who are American Jews don't live in Israel, and like the temple doesn't exist. So we don't do bring the actual barley harvest anymore. We just sort of count. But it's important that we remember that we're actually counting something. We're counting the barley harvest. We're counting from the day in which we originally brought the barley harvest. And of course, we'll talk more about the meaning of counting 50 days, why 50, and the halachot that pertain to that, the practical laws that pertain to that. But I think it's so important for us to understand the theoretical origins of this law before we go into the practical. All right, my friends. Well, lastly, turn to Menorat HaMaor. And today, my friends, we are actually going to begin the Sefer. Now, it would have made sense at the beginning of the Sefer, at the beginning of the podcast, but we couldn't do that because we were jumping right into preparation for Pesach. We started the day after Purim, so we had to go into preparation for Pesach. So we've really been learning the sections of Menorat HaMaor on Pesach. So now we're going to really start at the beginning. We're going to start at the main introduction. And I think what's wonderful about this introduction, it really shows sort of what this book is all about. And so I'm going to really enjoy going through this introduction with you. And it's going to be really interesting to see today how he starts the introduction and why that's so important to the Sefer. So he begins, of course, with a piece of Gemara. He begins with a piece of Shabbos, which again shows, I think, what this is all about, right? Menorat HaMaor is not a ethical, spiritual character building text that is just built off of the smart prose and opinions of the author. But unlike other Musar Sforim, and again, probably the main reason why I chose this, and I love this Sefer, is because it really is built off of Gemara. It's really built off of Midrash and Talmudic Agadah, and really relies on those original sources in order to make their points, make his point, which is really beautiful. And so we see that here, right? He first brings Rabbi Yochanan, who says, what is the meaning of the verse? Hashem gives the word, the bearers of good tiding are a good host. And so this is a weird line from Psalm 68:12. The rabbis love weird lines that they don't quite know what it means. So they're going to kind of gives them the entrance to make a homiletical interpretation of it. And he says, Kol dibor v'dibor shi'atza mepi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every single utterance that came forth from the mouth, the Holy One, blessed be He, was divided into 70 languages, right? So it's very important. What he says here is the meaning of this, at least the homiletical meaning, is that everything that God says, it comes out in 70 different languages, right? It gets immediate translation in the way it comes out. And I think he's deriving it from this verse, obviously very creatively, by saying this is like greeters, like language itself is how we greet people and actually make contact with others. And the Torah needs itself, when it comes out, it immediately is put into the language of the people who are speaking it or need to hear it. And I think this shouldn't strictly be about language, about what language, technically formal language is the Torah in? Is it being translated to French or German or something like that? But really what this is about is like the Torah, immediately the way God says something, God could say something and it can mean the exact right thing to the right person. And I think in a deeper sense, right, the Gemaras and the Agadot and the Midrashim that the Menorat HaMaor will bring are exactly like that. They say what we need them to say at the time, and that might mean different things to different people, which is incredible. Because most Musar and ethical Sforim are written for do this, do that, do this, do that, and this is what you should do. Menorat HaMaor is not written like that. Because they're bringing Midrashim and Agadot, it is less clear always exactly what he's trying to say to every single person, and it is definitely a sefer that could be sort of interpreted farther and sort of leaves things a little bit esoteric, which again, I wouldn't say this is a beginner sefer. I don't say this is a sefer that should just be picked up immediately by every Jew and learned, because it's not. It does need some guidance, because it doesn't bring, it really just brings mostly the original sources. But I think that's actually why it's so helpful to us at this moment. Now, he brings another Agadata from the same place, that says something similar but a little bit different. He says, the school of Rabbi Ishmael taught from here, behold, my word is like fire. This is Jeremiah 23:29. Behold, my word is like fire, says Hashem, and like a hammer that shatters rock. And this interesting verse he interprets by saying, just as a hammer breaks into many sparks, so too the words of Torah divide into many facets. So this is sort of saying the same thing, right? The Torah is divided. Once the Torah is said, it immediately divides into many different parts and is spoken, at least in the first Rabbi Yochanan's version of this teaching, that it has different, it's spoken immediately in every language, in every way that people need to understand it and what they need to understand from it at the time. It speaks to them in where they are. But I think Rabbi Yishmael does a wonderful job here of actually saying, you're right that the Torah is split into many different parts, but that's because it's so powerful. That's because it's so strong that it divides things, that it has so many different facets to it, because it's like fire, because it's so strong in its action to separate and to categorize and to understand. So one Rabbi Yochanan's version of this is the Torah is super welcoming, because immediately once it's said, it can be understood by the person on their level and where they're at. But Rabbi Ishmael, on the other hand, says, no, right? It's not necessarily that. It's the fact that it's so powerful. It's so strong. It's chazak. It's that it breaks things like a hammer. It's incredible. So it's a very different way to understand this. And I think you can understand that the sort of multifaceted meaning of the Torah as, well, this makes it very good for people because they can learn the message that they need to learn at this moment. But also there's another facet of that, that's actually what shows the power of Torah, of why Torah is so strong. So this is a great way of why when the Gemara puts two Agadot next to each other, when they put two pieces of two homiletical teachings next to each other, it's not random, right? It's part of a conversation. It's part of one whole thing, which is really, really important. Lastly, he ends this by saying, one more Gemara from Eruvin here. His locks are wavy. This is a Song of Songs 5:11. This teaches that one may derive from every single stroke and stroke of the Torah heaps upon heaps of law. And he's saying here, and again, definitely another forced interpretation. His locks are wavy, okay, and he's turning this into, well, it means that the Torah has many different facets, and you can learn a lot of things from even one thing about the Torah. Okay, quite a jump. Why is he bringing this here? Of course, he's not making this up. It's coming from the Gemara, also from Tractate Eruvin. But why is he bringing this here particularly? He's bringing this to show us that the teachings that is going to be brought in this text, they teach you many different things. It's not like one Agadata is there, or one Talmudic story or homiletical interpretation is there just to teach one thing. Rather, each homiletical interpretation, each Agadata, each story that we're going to learn in Menorat HaMaor is going to be able to lend itself and teach us so many different things, which, if there's one true thing that I found with the Agadata, is it is so much bigger than we can ever imagine. Every passage of the Torah teaches us so many things, and I think this, of course, should help us appreciate the Torah in a better way. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.